What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Riot's been going pretty hard on introducing as much counterplay as possible to League of Legends recently, and that's pretty important because some of the most frustrating stuff in the game is when you die and you feel like you had no chance to see it coming. And with so many new reworks taking place, a lot of the new ability designs are made with counterplay in mind a lot more than they were before, and for both old and new champions, Riot are updating them using a design mechanic that they call visual communication. The idea is that it should be very clear on your screen when something dangerous is happening, and that way it's more obvious when something is happening, which of course makes it easier to react and gives you a better chance of playing against it. And this mechanic of visual communication is Riot's new counterplay obsession, because they seem to be putting it on almost every new champion, or at least a very large amount of them, including the reworks of course. And as always, if you guys enjoy the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, hit that dislike. Now, a very recent example of this new style of counterplay is Annie's change on patch 6.9 that gave her a resource bar that fills up based on how far stacked her passive is. Originally, you could only tell how many stacks that Annie had by clicking on her and then looking at the icon, or waiting to see the animation around her. And this meant that oftentimes Annie could stack up to 3 stacks of her passive and then stun you before you realized her stun was actually up, because she could use her Molten Shield during the cast of her Q, which is not great from a counterplay perspective because it's fairly misleading and doesn't give you a lot of time to react to it. By showing her passive stacks on her resource bar, it's very clear to see how far along she is, and you can play around the threat of her stun a lot easier. And this is an interesting change for both players. The enemy player facing against Annie will have all the information they need to play around Annie's super powerful passive, and Annie will also be able to use her stacks to threaten an enemy and potentially zone them a lot more reliably than she could before. It's not just the person being attacked that benefits from a change like this. League is a game of information, and using the available information to your advantage is something that both players can do in a lot of situations. And this introduces a whole new angle to outplaying your opponent. When you guys think counterplay, you probably think stuff like maybe being able to dodge a skill shot, or perhaps like buying an item like Quicksilver Sash to escape a stun. And this visual communication form of counterplay gives players more access to a strategic kind of outplay potential or counterplay. And what I mean by this is that you don't have to worry about picking a certain champion or buying a certain item, because the game tells you what you need to know and then you can make decisions based off of that information. It creates a very interactive form of counterplay, and it's honestly really healthy gameplay on paper, where players don't feel like they're caught off guard or have lost just due to the champions they're against. Instead, they can make the decisions that win instead. And Riot's definitely planning on going ahead with this style of counterplay because of this. I mean, it gives players a reason to depend on strategy instead more than just mechanical skill. And it's definitely one of the best forms of counterplay, at least on paper in terms of healthy design, because it's a type of counterplay that is controlled and revolves around just the individual player decisions. There's no mechanics, there's no items you have to buy, it's just what you choose to do in that situation, which gives every champion in the game access to that counterplay in any situation, which is something that Riot really just likes to see in a certain type of counterplay. Zed is also an example of Riot's direction here with his more recent change on patch 6.12 that should essentially do a similar kind of thing, or at least that's why it's being implemented, which is giving his shadows indicators to tell you which one is which, so that you can distinguish the one from his W and the one from his ultimate apart from each other. The blue ring around a W shadow and there's a red ring around the ultimate shadow now are aimed to help the enemy team keep track of Zed's location in a fight and which shadows he can jump to. A change like this is great because it doesn't hurt Zed's power to assassinate, it doesn't nerf his numbers or his damage or anything like that, but it gives the enemy team more of an idea where Zed has switched to and where he could go next. And this is a very fair form of counterplay and introduces some mind game elements that are quite important for strategic gameplay. And this type of counterplay is something that Riot is obviously gravitating towards quite a lot now, and it's pretty clear to see why they like it so much, but that's not to say that Riot's new vision for counterplay is perfect. As with pretty much anything in game, getting the balance right is kind of tricky. I mean, players should be rewarded for being proactive with their teams, but if the mechanics and the playmaking potential is just made way too obvious for the enemy team, that proactive play starts to become very telegraphed, making it really hard to effectively catch and kill targets, and really hurts those sort of high moments of you trying to make a play on your opponent. Say Annie was in lane stacking up her stun and getting ready to go for the level 6 all-in. With the new passive indicator, the enemy laner is probably not going to go anywhere near her until she uses her passive on a minion. So Annie players might find it way harder to make those proactive plays and those aggressive moments that really just make so many plays happen. The result is that the Annie player has to play even riskier for the payoff, and they also have to settle for zoning the enemy away from CS rather than actually getting a kill sometimes. Although that's not necessarily a bad thing, it does introduce some different patterns of gameplay. Small changes like this will definitely have an effect on the game, and reducing the number of surprise kills will probably be a big part of it. It's a hard trade-off to make considering how fun it is to just surprise someone and just totally blow up an enemy in League. But if Riot can get the balance right and players can adjust to the new information available, it could result in some more interesting and strategic games at least. And of course, there's always still the possibility to catch people by surprise from an unwarded bush or maybe a flank. Visual communication isn't an idea only for champion abilities though. Every single part of the game can be updated to benefit from that type of strategic counterplay. I mean, let's take teleport for example. A big problem with teleport is that it can often just go unnoticed, especially when two teleports are stacked on top of each other. Changes on the PBE, likely coming in patch 6.13 or maybe 6.14, include an update to the teleport animation that should also make it way harder to miss accidentally. And this is important for such a game-changing ability that anyone can take as a summoner spell, and will hopefully mean that players will have less difficulty spotting incoming enemy teleports and also reacting to your own ally teleports. However, that in turn makes teleport a bit harder to use and means that to be properly rewarded for a good teleport, you have to set it up much more in advance with your team rather than just using it the second things are looking bad in a different lane. And this was especially noticeable in bot lane. I mean, a teleport from a top laner making a 3v2 would often just spell disaster for the entire laning phase. So hopefully this will reduce the strain a little bit and promote using teleports all over the map. And it's definitely what Riot is intending with that change to teleport. And might also introduce some more fighting for early objectives instead of just ganks. It works both ways though. A clear teleport animation will also help allies who aren't expecting a teleport to better prepare for your arrival if they see it coming sooner. Either way, it really promotes coordination, which is a big part of Riot's drive for the game at the moment. Visual communication should really help teams coordinate better, and teamwork is Riot's #1 priority at the moment with the game. So where should Riot go next with this type of counterplay? Well, there's quite a lot of champions that could actually benefit quite a lot from a similar kind of update. One of the more requested changes of this sort of category a while back that we can remember was for Riven to actually show her passive stacks in her resource bar. And this was kind of shut down at the time because the resource bar is for, well, resources. But that was a while back before Riot started using this type of counterplay a lot more and seeing it with Annie, so it's not entirely unreasonable to make Riven show her passive stacks on her resource bar. This type of change would probably be aimed to help beginners more rather than actually introducing new counterplay to Riven, but it really could help players keep track of their stacks and learn to weave auto attacks properly. Basically, if the bar is full when you're dueling an enemy, you know that you're not being as efficient as possible. Pantheon is also potentially another similar thing to Annie. The problem is that clicking on a champion to see their buff bar is a very clunky sort of way to check for passive effects. It's very counterintuitive because it means that you have to go out of your way and you aren't focused on what's actually going on in the game. A change indicator in the Jhin ammo style might work with Pantheon so that players know when to expect Pantheon is able to block a basic attack. To be honest, there's a lot of champions like that could use that kind of update. Syndra's total number of spears maybe Kassadin's stacks on his E, perhaps Akali's ultimate dash charges. The list kind of drags on and there's pros and cons for each, and I don't want to say that, it should be implemented for everyone. And we're not 100% sure on Riot's exact design philosophy with this types of things, but generally more clarity is good for the game, so we expect to see these on the list to update potentially. I mean, I'm just throwing around ideas here. But if Riot does decide to add more information to the champion bars, those are some potential candidates. Another idea was to have home guard teleports have a slightly different animation since they are so much more lethal with that huge speed bonus compared to just a regular teleport where the champion doesn't have home guard. And since everyone receives home guards automatically, it's somewhat safe to assume that there's going to be some teleports from people's bases after the bonus of home guard kicks in after 20 minutes. And the difference between a home guard teleport and a regular teleport is quite impactful, so having a distinction might not be a bad thing, though it might let you know which enemy is teleporting, maybe giving away some extra information that you wouldn't otherwise have though. Anyway, that's just about our thoughts for Riot's new counterplay obsession and their use of visual communication to make the game fairer and healthier. It's important though that Riot doesn't get too carried away and make the game just too telegraphed for players to ever catch each other out by surprise again, but improving clarity is a great way to increase the counterplay in certain champions. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this type of counterplay, so definitely let us know in the comments below. And looks like that's going to be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.